Good morning. My name is Philip Wareham. I'm one of the teachers here at the Lily Grove Missionary Baptist Church, and I've been asked to review the lesson dated March the 28th, entitled Elijah, Prophet of Courage. The printed text is 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 5 through 18. There are two animals that the Creator identifies himself with. One of them is the eagle, the other one is the lion. The lion is what I want to focus on today. The lion, as you know, is called the king of the jungle. And yet, the lion is not the strongest in the jungle. He's not the biggest. He's not the fastest. He's not the most intelligent animal in the jungle. But yet, he's the king of the jungle. What is it that makes this lion the king of the jungle when he has all these limitations? One word, his courage. You see, the lion has an enormous amount of courage. He can see an elephant. Now, the elephant is 10 times bigger than him, 10 times heavier than him. But when he sees an elephant, he thinks of one thing, lunch. And when the elephant sees the lion, the very thing that he thinks of is eater. And because the way he sees the lion, he responds in fear and he takes flight. The lion, on the other hand, goes after him because he is full of courage. In today's lesson, we're going to be talking about Elijah, the prophet of courage. What we want to look at in this lesson is the courage that Elijah has. We want to find out how did he develop that courage. And one thing we want to take from this lesson is that when we have an opportunity to speak for God, that we will do so with courage. The lesson is divided up into three outlines. The first outline is God's providence, verses 5 through 8. The very thing I ask myself is, where do we see God's providence in these verses right here? Well, the first one I seen was in verse 5. Verse 5 says, "And Ahab said unto Obadiah, Go into the land, unto all the fountains of water, and to all the brooks. Peradventure we may find grass to save the horses and mules alive, that we may lose not all beasts." The first thing that I seen there is that on a certain day, it was just on a certain day that King Ahaz called Obadiah to go into the land. The second sense of providence that I seen there is verse 6. It reads as follows. "So they divided the land between them to pass throughout it. Ahab went on one way by himself, and Obadiah went another way by himself." It is the providence of God that sent Obadiah on one way to himself. It was that stretch of land that Obadiah took is where he's going to meet Elijah the prophet. The third providence that I see in these scriptures is in verse 7. Verse 7 reads as follows. "And as Obadiah was in the way, behold, Elijah met him, and he knew him, and fell on his face and said, Art thou my Lord Elijah?" The providence of God is seen in verse 7, in that Elijah and Obadiah met as Obadiah was on a certain land on a certain day, and they met together. What is that? What is the scenario that these two men meet? Well, Elijah, there's been a drought. They're 3.5 years into this drought. Elijah has went into hiding. God has protected him for 3.5 years. He has provided for him. He has protected him. Now, all of a sudden, the Lord tells him to go and present himself to Ahab, the king who is looking for him so he can reverse the curse. Elijah went out to go and find Ahab. But in this certain time, he finds his servant, Obadiah, his household servant. Obadiah is a man of God. He's a servant of God. And he and Elijah meet while they're looking for grass for their horses. The question I ask myself is, why did God want Elijah to meet up with Obadiah? Well, the first thing that I found out is that God wanted to use Elijah in the life of Obadiah to strengthen his faith and broaden his capacity for ministry. That was the reason why God set up the certain day, set up a certain place, and set up a certain time so these two men could meet. It wasn't all about Elijah, but it was what Elijah could do for Obadiah. You see, God was going to use Obadiah in a mighty way. But before Obadiah could be used by God, his faith has to be strengthened. And Elijah was sent to meet him to do just that. One of the key points that I've seen in this first outline is that strong faith is a prerequisite for a strong ministry. If God has called you to be involved in a ministry, and He want to make that ministry strong, a strong faith is what one must have. One of the second key points that I see in this lesson is that God is in the business of stretching us so we can become more effective vessels for His purpose. Question: when has God called you to have an unexpected encounter? Did it happen during this pandemic? Did it happen during the power outages? Is it happening because of some economic challenges? If you're going through some trials and tribulation, maybe God is trying to stretch you to build up your faith so He can use you in a mighty way for ministry. The second outline we find in verses 9 through 16. It's called God's Servant Obadiah. When did Obadiah receive the invitation to become a servant messenger of God? Well, it happened when he least expected. Have you ever been in school and the teacher pulls out and said, put all your books up, get your pen and a paper out, we're getting ready to have a pop test? When did that happen? Well, most of the time it happens when you least expect it. Well, that's exactly what God is testing Obadiah with. When Obadiah least expect his test to happen to him, that's when it happened. You see, Obadiah has got to a point to where he is settled in now. He's already hidden the 100 prophets from Jezebel. There's a sense of peace in the land. And all of a sudden, when he thinks everything is going smooth, Elijah shows up and tells him to go and tell his master, Ahab, that Elijah is on the scene. How did Obadiah respond to this invitation? Well, the first thing we see in verse 9, he responded with fear. Verse 9 says, "Oh, sir," Obadiah protested, "what harm have I done to you that you are sending me to my death at the hands of Ahab?" Obadiah was afraid that if he goes to Ahab and tells him that he's seen Elijah, and God calls Elijah to go somewhere else, and when they come back and Elijah's not there, he's afraid that Ahab is going to call his death warrant on him, that he's going to have him put to death for lying to him. He was afraid of that. The second thing that Obadiah responded to was excuses. We see that in verse 13. Verse 13 says, "Has no one told you, my Lord, about the time when Jezebel was trying to kill the Lord's prophet? I hid 100 of them in 2 caves and supplied them with food and water." Obadiah is pretty smart. He's trying to talk his way out of the assignment that he has. He's trying to use excuses about what he did in the past so he can be free from what God has called him to do today. How did Elijah calm his fears, calm his excuses, and calm his anxiety? Well, he offered him encouragement. We can see that in verse 15. What did Elijah do when Obadiah responded with fear? He used excuses to try to talk his way out. Elijah used encouragement. Verse 15 says, "But Elijah said, I swear by the Lord Almighty, in whose presence I stand, that I will present myself to Ahab this very day." When Elijah told him that, words of encouragement, Obadiah didn't say another word. He went and found Ahab. What's the key point? The key point is this: when facing the challenges of a ministry opportunity, find mature believers to seek their encouragement. All of us are going to be tested. All of us are going to be called to do some things that we're very apprehensive about doing. How do we overcome those fears and apprehensions and anxiety? Well, the author in this lesson shows with us that you need to find you someone who's mature in their faith, to get encouragement from them so that you can ease your fears and ease your anxiety. The question: how do you think you will respond when God calls you to ministry? Are you going to use excuses? Are you going to try to talk your way out of doing it? The lesson teaches us that you need to find someone who's more mature, who's probably in that ministry that God is calling you to do, to get their opinion and seek some encouragement and restoration from them. Third outline is called God's prophet Elijah, the prophet of courage. Ahab shows up on the scene after Obadiah goes and get him and presents him to Ahab. Ahab tells Elijah, "Oh, you're the troublemaker." And what Ahab was trying to do, he tried to hold Elijah responsible for the drought and to charge him with a crime against the state worthy of death. But Elijah is not intimidated or afraid of the king. Instead of apologies or pleas of pardon, the prophet, behold, boldly throws back the charge to Ahab. Ahab is the king. And if he says that you are going to die, that can happen. But even in the midst of all that fear, we find Elijah is not intimidated. He boldly stands up to Ahab and rebuttals everything that he says. Key point, speaking boldly in the presence of fear is the evidence of spiritual maturity. When you're able to speak boldly, when you see some injustice is going on, when you see somebody mistreated, when you need to stand up for what is right, that's when you know that you're in the spirit of maturity, that you have passed from immaturity to maturity. Speaking boldly in the presence of fear is the evidence of spiritual maturity. Here's a question for us. When have you spoken boldly in the presence of fear? As I looked at the news yesterday, I've seen that a lot of our Asian brothers and sisters are being attacked just because they're Asian. And one of the things that I heard the young lady said is that when we're being attacked, nobody is standing up to defend us or come to our rescue. How would you respond if you see somebody being mistreated or being unjustly attacked? Would you stand up? Would you act boldly? Would you do the right thing? Well, God is calling us to be a part of his family business. And part of God's family business is righteousness and justice. That's what he's about. He wants us to stand up for what is right and seek justice for those who are wrong. So what did we cover in this lesson on today? We found out that God wants us to be strong in our faith. He wants us to grow and have our faith in a strong position so that we can be in ministry. He also wants us to seek mature believers when we are faced with uncertainties and anxiety about a ministry call. And he also wants us to stand up boldly for him when we speak for his behalf. One thing about that line is that he's not afraid of anything. Even though he might be undersized against some animals, he still has the confidence that he will be victorious. And we as believers have to have that same attitude. Paul says it best, that I can do all things through Christ who strengthened me. Boldness, confidence, and courage is the mark of a mature believer. Thank you very much.